spirits high, even as things grew darker and more awful and unbelievable. And then Grace eventually, I was writing as we had crossed the halfway mark of this current administration, and that was making me happy. Plan A had been that we not re-elect him, and Plan B was how do we go on from this? I certainly need no political attack on him right now. I just am describing the origin of these books, sort of. So I think you might find that the pieces are less furious than the pieces in Plan B, although if you've ever heard me speak, you know I'm a huge believer in anger and grief, especially for women who have been taught from the age of 2 or 3 that it's really best that they not have either, and that it's really truly necessary for the soul that you insist on the right to be both. So there's lots of grief, and there's pretty mad, I have to say, but I'm not as mad. And that's a miracle. And I've been asked a lot. My book just came out on Tuesday, so I've just been on the East Coast since then. So I think I've had 3 readings and about 20 interviews. And people keep wanting to know how I got less enraged. And it was partly, I have to admit, that things have just gone so badly for them. It was like, it wasn't all that I've just become so spiritually evolved. Some of it was that now I just look at him, like I looked at him at did you all see his press conference on Tuesday? It was excellent. It was very commanding. But I look at him now and I think, tick-tock, tick-tock. And that makes it a lot easier. But also at my church, at the end of the service, there's the opening of the church doors where you come up if you need extra prayer on you or on somebody you love, or people. We have a lot of people that have really serious mental challenges and stuff going on. And so you come up to pray with the pastor quietly, but then the whole congregation is putting prayer on you. So I realized in AA people say the willingness comes from the pain. The willingness to change or to try something new comes from pain. And I had gotten crazy. I was so angry and I was just so confused, like animal confusion all the time, about how I could be such a pacifist and really a pretty easygoing person, and then there was this other thing. And so I would go up during the altar call, and when Veronica would, sometimes you sound like a kid is older and it's scary and I hate that stuff, but I just went up and I said, I hate these guys so much. And she didn't judge me or shame me or try to correct me or fix me or spackle me back together. She said, it's so good you brought it up to us. And week after week after week I went up, and it took a long time, because grace sometimes happens eventually. It's unfortunate that God did not think of a magic wand, which would have worked for me, or anything where you could just know what you're doing when you pray. You get the answer, like you get email, or a phone call, or skywriting, but it doesn't happen for me like that very often. But it did happen in this case that a lot of my hatred was really diluted by the prayers of the people with whom I worship. And it was diluted because I was talking about it with a lot of people. You know, the thing that keeps us sick is the secrets and the conviction that if people really know who we were, they'd just run screaming for their cute little lives because they find us so disgusting you would say, I'm in a very, very dire mental state right now because of the war in Iraq, which is basically the truth for me, although it's better. And the wrong person might say, oh, for goodness sakes, all these things have a beginning, and, they say, oh, for goodness sakes. And the right person would say, I really understand that. I've got a minute if you want to talk. And then they would tell you their own stories or their own reaction or their own latest effort to do something about it, and you'd end up laughing. And when you've ended up laughing, then you're home free. So that's how that title came about, was that it was so gradual but so profound. I was originally calling it Forgivishness. Because I just struggle. I know that this is forgiveness school down here, and I know we're here to practice forgiveness and harder of all even is to receive forgiveness, especially hardest of all from ourselves. But it is not my strong suit. It comes really hard. And I don't even think we have it in us to forgive, but I think what you can do is be available for whatever the Holy Spirit can think up and nudge your heart with. And so you can experience it. It's not something you can do or chase down. It's something like grace that you receive. So, anyway, let's start out. I wanted to read a couple things. From the new book. And, I have to tell you, this was funny though. I just saw the dust jacket. And I did an interview with an NPR station in the South, and I can't remember what city it was in, on Tuesday when I was in New York City. And he kept referring to my opening statement. And there isn't an opening statement. The first piece is called Prelude, so I thought it must be that. But then he was quoting words that I didn't even remember at all. And I didn't have a book with me in the hotel room. It turned out all he had read was the dust jacket copy. And I didn't even write it, it's third person. It's Lamott, and Lamott knows and lives by this belief. Was it irreverent? Obviously that's not how, and so I did a 45-minute interview based on the dust jacket. It says that wherever you look, there's trouble and wonder, pain and beauty, restoration and darkness. Can you talk more about that? strict and good with them. And what was I going to say now? I forgot. Sunday school. Oh God, I'm so spaced out. I've been to 4 cities in 3 days. So, that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So I think what I'll do is I'll just read this, and then whatever I was going to say will come back to me. And then I'd love to just take a bunch of questions. I'm actually not in a hurry because my flight's not till 9:45. I actually do have arthritis and hate personalizing books, so I will sign anything you brought, no matter how old or no matter how many, but I'm just going to sign my name. And I'm going to be very strict, like I am with a 3 to 6 year old in my Sunday school class. And, I know what I was going to say, it's not even important, but I only teach about once a month, but and I hate to miss it because it's held during our services. So all of us are together for about half an hour, and then we take the kids off to our various classrooms. And I hate missing service. I hate missing the sermon and the singing and all the singing that you miss. And yet every single time I get in the room with them, I just am in love again. And they get me every time. So that morning I'll be going, oh, I really need church today. And I get to the Sunday school, and it turns out I really needed the Sunday school that day. So this is a piece called Wailing Wall. There was so much bad news this winter that many of us were left feeling pummeled and disturbed. Parents and relatives died, kids got into much more serious trouble, and way too many friends got a bad diagnosis. What can you say when people call with a scary or heartbreaking prognosis? You say that we don't have to live alone with our worries and losses, that all the people in their time pool will be there for them. You say that it totally sucks and that grace abounds. You say that you can't say that things will be fine down the road because that holds the spiritual authority of someone chirping, "No worries" at Starbucks, or my personal favorite, "It's all good" at the market. It's so not all good, and I am worried sick. It's fine to know, but not to say, that in some inadequate and surprising ways, things will be semi-okay. The way wildflowers spring up at the rocky dirt line where the open space meadow meets the road, where the ground is so mean. Just as it's fine to know, but not say, that anger is good, a bad attitude is excellent, and the medicinal powers of shouting and complaining cannot be overestimated. I mean, especially for women, because we were told to go unnoticed. We were told to stay under the radar. I don't know if that's so true in the South, but I can only imagine it is. If you are perfectly quiet and have no emotions and smile and help with the laundry and have no needs, then you're home free, right? Okay, so I believe in shouting and complaining, and I believe in grief, and I believe in rage, and I believe if you want to get back to original self, start getting mad. And if you're an American girl over the age of 12 and you're not mad, I think you've completely missed the boat. One intensely green spring morning, I prepared to teach children at my church about the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. I had been assigned to teach the youngest children who have the attention span of squirrel monkeys. But at least I had good curriculum materials and my friend Neshama to help. I'd been pumped up about the lesson the night before when I saw an art project suggested in the curriculum materials that involved building a paper wailing wall with students to teach them about pouring one's heart out to God and about letting go. I'd also printed images from the internet of men clustered at the wall, crowds milling around nearby, harder to find shots of women at the wall, multiple copies of one block of stone, and a picture of a young boy and his father in yarmulkes pushing prayers written on paper into cracks in the wall. If you want to find pictures of women and girls girls at the Wailing Wall and you Google it, you go to about the 5th page. That's the truth. You can go home tonight and I think you'll find that that's true. There is something, pushing prayers written on paper into cracks in the wall. This is something I do all the time. Shove bits of paper with prayers and names on them into desk drawers, little boxes, anything, my glove compartment. I found that when you give up on using your mind to solve a problem, which your mind is holding on to like a dog with a chew toy, writing it down helps turn off the terrible alertness. When you're not siphoned into the black hole of worried control and playing fretful savior, turning the problem over to God or the elves in the glove compartment harnesses something in the universe that is bigger than you, and then who knows, just might work. So I started off class as I always do, by separating the known offenders, 2 brothers who are 4 and 5, and from whom one can expect more or less muffled explosions. We had only boys that day. The brothers, 2 6-year-olds, and a 3-year-old wild man we'll call Frederick, and Frederick's mother. Each boy reminded me of Sam at different ages, and as he still is, goggle-eyed and watchful at 3. At 4, newly articulate, like the younger of the 2 brothers, his eyes big mammal wide and brown. Sam was still cuddly at that age, more like a baby than a kid, still seeking comforting things. Me, for instance. At 5, he was like the older of the brothers. He grew more wiry, was prone to anger, and since other children messed with him more, he could no longer afford to space out. He no longer got distracted by his navel, no longer twisted his fingers into his forehead. He and his friends were learning to pick on one another and play the social angle. At 5, there's a gap between who you want to be and who you are. You're still pretty small, not able to read or write too well. I know it was scary for Sam to think that he would never learn. 6-year-olds, like the boys visiting, seemed as worldly and independent as bachelors to Sam when he was 5. 6-year-olds could ride their bikes to school, and they had a cover. Mannerisms that masked how needy and angry and afraid life made them feel much of the time. They were making images of themselves. It's scary when the self divides into one being who will be more noticed and admired, and another worried person who gapes out at the world from inside. I welcomed everyone, made introductions, and then launched into soft body. We clenched our fists, our faces, and scrunched up our shoulders to our ears like Richard Nixon. We held them like that for a minute, grimacing, and at the count of 3 we released. Then we did it again. It's a tool for the children, the tool of having their bodies be quiet for a few minutes. Afterward, they revert to form, bouncing in their seats, poking, blurting, sliding down wide-eyed like corpses beneath the table. But when I say, butts on the chair, now, they obeyed. Except for Frederick, who shimmied and babbled. His mother looked as if she could use a nice, fresh martini. Let's do soft body now. It is such a great exercise, and it's great for the school kids, too, wherever you may be teaching. But my back, is not, along with forgiveness, is not my strong suit. I'm not quite sure what is. So what you do is, and you've done it before in exercises, you make very tight fists, and this is the sacrament of soft body. And you lift your shoulders up to your ears as far as it will go. You close your eyes, and if you're a kid or if you feel great, you can make horrible, contorted, clenched did loved and chosen. I sat on the couch and glanced slowly around in a goofy, menacing way, and then said, "Is there anyone here wearing a blue sweatshirt with Pokemon on it?" The 4-year-old looked down at his chest, astonished to discover that he matched the description. Like, what are the odds? He raised his hand. "Come over here to the couch," I said. "You are so loved and so chosen." He clutched at himself like a beauty pageant finalist. Then I asked if anyone that day was wearing green socks with brown shoes, or a Giants cap, or an Argyle vest. Each of them turned out to be loved and chosen, which does not happen so often in what they call the real world. Even Neshama, anyone in red shoes today, leapt toward the couch with relief. My Jesuit friend Tom once told me that this is a good exercise because in truth, everyone is loved and chosen, even Dick Cheney. Even, and this is hard to believe, Saddam Hussein. God loves them both because God loves, period. This, more than anything else, I said to Tom, does not make sense to me. Well, that's because you're a little angry, Tom explained. But when people die, they are forgiven and welcomed home. Then God will help them figure out how to clean up the disgusting messes they have made. God has skills and ideas on how to do this. After loved and chosen, I did a shakedown and made them hand over everything in their pockets that might distract them or me. We lit a candle. Let there be light, warmth, and all that. No harm in this, right? No worries. We bowed our head in prayer, our hands to our chins, because in all pictures since time began, good children pray in this pose. The hardest part came next, when I tried to get the boys to sit quietly for a story from the Bible. I don't want them to feel sentenced to Sunday school. I want, if nothing else, for them to relax their bodies, remember that they are loved and chosen, and hear a great story, because that is how they seem to learn best. The kids love stories that involve dead people. Don't you find it's true, you Sunday school teachers? They love death, they love battle and violence, and the kids love stories that involve dead people. It's one of the spiritual dimensions that they desperately need to have addressed, the incomprehensible fact that someone is there and then not. How can this possibly be the great mystery of life? And how can you go on without that person? I don't have an answer. There are deaths I have not gotten over yet, but somehow over time, the acute helplessness of death has become merely painful. I read them a short version of the story of David establishing his throne in Jerusalem so that the people of Israel finally had a home in a great city after the chaotic nomadic life they had always been living. Before, they had to carry the sacred Ark of the Covenant around like so much camping gear. And David's son, wise King Solomon, built a temple. This was where the Jews flocked to worship. It was supposed to help them stay focused on God and turn their attention away from the distractions outside and from the idols of the surrounding nations. It was a place where God could hear the cries and prayers and joys of his people, a place of refuge. It was supposed to last forever. 400 years later, though, bad guys came from the north, the warriors of King Nebuchadnezzar, and destroyed it, capturing or killing all the Jews they could. I paused to look at the class. 2 of the boys looked utterly undone. The rest looked stoked. But one great It's the wall in this one photo here, where the boy and his father are sticking a prayer into the cracks. I want you to try to feel a connection between yourselves and the children who came to the wall in ancient times, asking God for help, trusting in his love. The kids listen pretty well, except for Frederick, who moves sneakily around the room like an incompetent spy. I guided him back to his mother's lap. I wanted to whisper something to him that I'd seen on a bumper sticker that week, that only 1/6 billionth of this was about him. But the lesson was on letting go, so I gritted my teeth winsomely at them. What does letting go mean, I asked. The boys looked around at one another, worried as cats. Let me show you, I said, and gripped 2 colored markers, one in each hand. What if, when we go in for our snacks, someone offers me a juice box, and I won't let go of these pens, even though I'm very thirsty? I told him to watch, and you'd have thought I was doing a magic trick as I slowly unfurled my fingers and let the markers dry. We all thought hard about this for a moment. So why would you even want to let go, I asked. One of the kids, 6-year-olds, answered, because you're thirsty? Bingo, I said. Thank you, Jesus. This was suddenly the most successful class I'd ever taught. See, sometimes if you're lucky, you get to a point where you're sick of a problem or worn down by tinkering with it or clutching it, and letting it go, maybe writing it down and sending it away, buys you some time and space, so maybe freedom and humor sneak in, which is probably what you were praying for all along. Then I put the supplies on the floor. Frederick grabbed at a pair of safety scissors, and after I took them away, I sent him to his mother and got down on the floor beside my materials. I'm really fierce and strict. You have to be. It's the only language they understand. I sent him to his mother and got down on the floor beside my materials. He began to cry, and just like that, the center stopped holding, and one of the 6-year-olds, horsing around, fell out of his seat and landed on my head. I shouted in surprise because he'd hurt my neck. After a moment, I realized I was fine, but I turned the class over to Neshama and went outside to compose myself. I dropped my chin to my chest and rubbed my neck. I felt like a weed, like one of those orange flowers that have sprung up lately, bound like fiddlehead ferns, and underneath resembling beautiful Chinese dragons. Grrr. Finally, I looked up at my church. I needed the grown-up service so badly, the singing, the prayers, the silence, and especially the very low incidence of injury. Sometimes it's as still as a forest. Sometimes a person speaks words of wisdom and comfort, and no one in 21 years has hurt me. The music moves you along. You rise and you sit and rise and sing and float, and you open your mouth and let the sound come out. No matter that you may sing poorly and fumble around with the hymnal and sing the wrong words, the hymn expands to make room for all the voices, even yours. We clap a lot at my church. It punctuates the air and chases the devil away. So I took a deep breath, stepped back into the classroom, and clapped for attention. I passed around the pictures of people at the wailing wall that I printed. I showed the boys the moss and grass growing in the cracks, and the prayers on paper sticking out. I let them study these, and then I explained that we were going to build a wall for the people of our church, where they could scribble notes to God to help them let go. We all got down on the floor together. I handed out paper replicas of the limestone blocks that make up the wall, gray, brown, and sand colored. We We crumpled them up to make them more realistic and stomped on them to burn off excess energy. I gave everyone safety scissors, even Frederick. I got a piece of poster board and the greatest invention in the history of Sunday schools everywhere, glue sticks. We pasted our blocks to the poster board and taped on strips and wads of green construction paper to represent the wonder of vegetation breaking through the cracks. Then we wrote, right on the blocks, the names of people we loved who were suffering, grandparents, people in nations at war, and then the names of new babies and of pets who had died. While we worked, we had wailing and muttering practice. I asked Neshama whether she had anything to add about letting go. She put down her glue stick and said, maybe turning things over is not the solution to everything, but she shrugged acidically. You do what you can. Then you get out of the way because you're not the one who does the work. How much of the lesson did the children take in that day? I can't answer that, and besides, I wasn't in charge. But it all comes to dropping a few seeds on the ground. If the soil is ready, the seeds will grow. And if not, you could have the Archangel Michael buzzing around the room in a thong, and the kids still wouldn't get it. At any rate, we all ended up on the floor with our butts in the air, like ducks feeding in the shallows of a marsh. And now I'm in injured. When I'd gotten out to the car after class, I kind of got it. And if you'd said, what did you get? I wouldn't have been able to say, I got that I believe that grace meets you right where you are, and it doesn't leave you where it found you. So grace enters staring at your church because you get kind of in memory and even remembering songs or home faces in prayer. You get bathed, you're just bathed in Holy Spirit. So you're better. So I went from where I was kind of bitter and martyred and with my hurt neck to being on the floor with all of the children, really immersed in another kind of water, of attention and a common project. So how it would start, usually I have a number of ideas that I know I want to include in something. Just say I'll stick with nonfiction because it's easier. The novel is probably a 25-page chapter, but anything I'd say would translate to nonfiction, fiction also, although I find fiction a lot harder. But one thing that helps me so much are these huge sheets of graph paper that you can buy at anywhere, Staples. They're like poster board size, but they're just there's paper, but they have grids on them. And even ever since I was a little kid, when they first brought graph paper into math, which was probably 4th or 5th grade, I just have loved graph paper because it just suggests that there's order. It suggests that there's order, and your handwriting always looks really good on graph paper. Always, it just does. So, and I put these big sheets on the wall because that would work for children. To have a place where they don't have to understand the order of things, they don't have to understand where it starts, where it ends. But it's a big, I have 3 of them up right now, and it's a big welcoming sheet taped to the wall. And on it, I put stuff I really desperately don't want to forget, but I just might make a list of things quickly over on the bottom left quadrant. And then in this one piece here, I might put 4 or 5 circles, this size, that are kind of the lily pads I'm going to land on in the pond from where I enter into it to where I take this kind of irregular journey across the water and to where I get out. Now, almost inevitably, the beginning, the beginning and the end completely defeat you. And often the end is on about page 4. And the beginning sometimes the beginning comes last of all. Sometimes it turns out the beginning was right there at the bottom of page 2. So, but I will put the scenes probably that I can already see, that I know I can describe. I can describe how we do soft body, the kids' sacraments, the soft body, loved and chosen, the sacrament of the snack, which we didn't have that day. And I can put those down. I put down the scene where the kid falls on me and I go outside. And so if you've read Bird by Bird, the 2 main things I know is you take really, really, really short assignments and you write awful first drafts. So I'll just start somewhere. I'll start with, say, the scene with the actual making of the wall when we all got down on the floor. So that's the very last thing. And I'll start to write and I'll think, this is terrible. I can be on my 3rd sentence and I'll think, this is terrible. This isn't going to go anywhere. This is sentimental. This is stupid. And you do it anyway. The secret to writing is you do it anyway. It's the Nike ad. You just do it. And then I end up eventually writing a really awful first draft. And it's really long and it's not at all elegant, but it's all kind of there, like a big, when you've grown your hair longer and it's a little full and it's gotten a little healthier, and then you can start finding the shapes in it, so then I do one of the things that's hardest of all for me is I take a lot of it out. And Jessica Mitford, the great writer, wrote about funeral homes, said you have to go through and kill your little darlings. And what it means is that probably a lot of the sections that you just think are too delicious for words sticking out because you're trying too hard or trying to get someone to say something that they'd never see. With my fiction, I'll have a great line and I'll want to use it somewhere, and so I'll just shoehorn it in, and I'll go through and I'll cut anything I can. Now, the main thing that's happened over the years evolutionarily for me is that I've learned to talk to myself like I would to a really dear friend. So I don't cross my arms as I'm going through and taking it out, going, see what a waste of time this was. I told you that this wasn't going to be. I don't do that. I go, you know, I say, maybe we can save this for somewhere else. And there might be some weird diatribe about the Nixon daughters, you know, in this piece. In this piece. Because I go into tangents and I trip out, and all of a sudden I'm remembering what color Tricia Nixon wore when she, what Julie wore when she was a bridesmaid, and you take it out, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I'll get it way, way down. And then by about Wednesday, the third day of work, there's sort of a shape, and it's like clay you're working with, it's still wet. And I'm moving things, and I've got a little bit fiercer with myself, but I'm saying, this is good, we don't need it, trust me. You need to tell a story. Do you have a story? You got a story? I've got 10 minutes and I'll listen. If you don't, I actually have something else I need to do. Not a story. It's like, Annie, what's the story? Well, it starts here, and then this happens, and this happens. There's a terrible detour, and then something happens very surprising, and then we end up here. So that's enough of a story for me. You know, I don't write really huge dramatic stuff because that's not my experience. So that's how it evolves. A novel evolves like that, but over much, much, much more time. Where I put circles on my graph paper about seeds I can see. One lily pad might be leading to another. I have to break it down into small components. I can either think of, if it's a novel, long lily pad, 20, 30, whatever pads, or another way to think of it is beads that you would string together, you know, and each bead needs to be okay with the one before it and the one that's going to be coming after it. And it's wonderful when one kind of highlights one that's about 4 away that you hadn't even noticed before. So that's how, it's just 3 steps forward, 3 back, 4 forward, and then only 2 back. I have a very good friend who's a very, very well-known writer. He's been working on a novel for 3 months, and he's on the 2nd chapter, and that's what it's like. And he said, it's going fine, you know. It's really hard and slow, and most days you think it's not going to amount to anything. Anybody else?
Yeah. You said that there's a very low incidence of injury and run-up church.
Yeah. You mean injured mentally, psychologically? That's a really good question, because a lot of people who come to see me have found faith again after having been really terrorized by fundamentalist upbringings, by very, very strict interpretations of the Bible, by the deep degree of shame that their denominations seem to be based on, and the necessity to exclude almost everyone else. And so I think a lot of injury, I meant physical injury, like they never hit me in church, which I like, you know. It's one of the things I love so much about church. But, I mean, I think half the country has been wounded and damaged by not half, I don't know how, I don't know why I would say half, but I know millions and millions and millions of people have been destroyed by their childhoods and churches. I know millions of children have been sexually abused by their priests and ministers and by elders and deacons. And so all I can say is that Christianity is famously a very destructive church, along with everything else that it is. And that what you hope to do is to be a church where people are welcome, and to be a church where you don't hassle. Like when I came to my church, I've been going to my church for 20 years, and I've been sober 21. I mean, I've been coming to church for 21 years and sober for 20. So I was drunk and sick with a lot of eating problems and disorders, and nuts, just nuts. When I was first coming, they couldn't tell what race I was, and it would turn out that the women told me later, we didn't know what you were. And I had this really horrible bicycle that I rode everywhere. I didn't have any money. And the thing was, and I wasn't looking to become a Christian by a long shot. My father had been raised by Presbyterian missionaries, and he really hated Christians, and especially Presbyterians, which is what and he'd always call them God's frozen people. But the thing that was so amazing was that no one tried to get their mitts on me. No one tried to get a credit for having me come back. No one crowded me. No one tried to get me into the Bible study. It was like Gandhi saying, be the change you want to see in the world. They were the love in the church that I had been looking for my entire life. The air was nutritious with their kindness. They were politically a very, very active church and had gotten in trouble with the National Presbyterian, which I liked. When Angela Davis was tried for murder at the Marin County courthouse many, many, many years ago, was it 30 plus now, I think. They had very tight security for the African Americans, and all the white people could just breeze through. And so the very old, very angry black women at my church brought this to the attention of the Presbyterian, the General Assembly, I believe, and they got a $10,000 donation to Angela Davis's defense fund. And I love money where your mouth is. You know, I mean, they were walking the walk. But the main thing for me was they didn't hassle me. Like, you know how a Christian can just hassle you till you're blue in the face. And this is why I basically refuse to talk about my beliefs as a Christian with other people who I know believe something very different, because it's going to make me nuts, and I'm probably not going to make them nuts. If I was going to make them nuts, I might be more open to it. I know it's going to make me crazy to hear about how God is very, very clear about this one thing, about, say, gays, or about whatever. And when, like I had a call-in the other day on a radio show in New York, it was from the South. Miss Lamott. It says right here, I'm looking at the words. That. And it was something about how God hates gays. And I said, you know, you get to think that. You totally get to think that that's what's true. You get to think that this is the absolute literal word of God. And I happen to disagree with you. And I actually am not able at this moment to say more than that. Next, you know. So, I think what you do is you be the church that you could imagine going to in your most vulnerable, damaged state. Because the air here, I mean, it's the air here tonight, it's different than it is in a bookstore. And I'd rather be in a bookstore than anywhere else on earth except at my church. It's different at a bookstore. And it's profound and nutritious at a bookstore in a different way than it is at a small theater. I was at a very fancy theater last night. It's very different. So you be the church, you be the kind of person who can let someone just be. You know, this is one of the real problems I have with the Christian church is that they will not let people just be. You know, it's about the human doing thing. And I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question. I know that when a lot of people that come to my readings and stuff have been unbelievably traumatized by their early lives in the church and by basically being told that if they continued to do this behavior, they weren't welcome. Not only they were not welcome, but they were doomed. And they were going to die pretty badly. And it must be nice to be so sure of yourself. You know, and I'm not. I've always said the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty. So I think that to not after that, I stopped being bulimic and got into very, very, very intensive therapy. So the church can often be some place that spirit and heart. It's like, for me, I didn't want to go to church. I was going to the flea market on Sundays at this place because I'd be hungover, and I love greasy food when I'm hungover. And the music, and I would say the Holy Spirit, because I'm a believer, and if you have trouble with that, you get to have trouble with that. What can I say? But it'd be like in the cartoons where there's a pie cooling on the sill, and there's always a slightly overweight guy, because this is the American projection of the middle-aged man. He said he's fat and he's watching TV, he's falling asleep on the Barca lounger, but this finger of smoke, of delicious huckleberry pie smoke, is wafting through the air and goes up to him, and then it kind of thumps him on the chest, and then he gets up and he goes and eats the pie, which he wasn't supposed to eat. That's how the music affected me. And I heard it, and I just went towards it. So that's what I know. That's my experience, is that, and this church continues to be a place. A lot of the people are elderly African Americans, and they were Baptists from the South. I go to a very Baptist-y Presbyterian church, and they were raised a certain way to believe certain things about certain people. They were raised believing that the Old Testament was the literal Word of God, and the Revelations and this, and that the prophecies have all come true. And it has been an incredible stretch for them, and they have stretched. And they have stretched to think, maybe if push comes to shove, I can't be positive about that. And so maybe it's true that we're loved and chosen, everyone. So, I don't know, I really love that Gandhi line about being the change you want to see in the world. Anybody else? He's graduated from high school, and he's much taller than I am. And in Plan B, I wrote about how he came up to me one day to hug me, and he realized he was about this much taller than I am, and he said, "When did that happen?" And then he said, "You're like a little gnome to me now." And then the other day, he just really discovered my work, because before, since he's been about 12, I've always given him the stories that he appears in and made sure that he didn't mind my writing about them, and I'd offer to make any changes that he was, if he was uncomfortable with something. And he called me. He's going to school in the Pacific Northwest, and I have 2 great stories. So the first thing he said was, "God, Mom, you're really good." And he said, "It's like having my own private tribal elder." So I've been feeling like Ishi all ever since. Who was the Indian hidden away in the woods that Gregory Bateson, I think, wrote about 40 years ago. And the other thing, this is such a cool story, because people all say, "How does Sam feel about being written about?" How he feels about it is that I asked him with Plan B if he would talk about that in front of an interviewer who asked, and I said, "Let's go get Sam." And Sam came up, and this was when he was 15, and 16 and 17 were just god-awful. God-awful. Awful, awful. There's a piece in here about having slapped him once, and it's a thing I'm ashamed of, but I want you to know, if you have a 16 or 17-year-old, I know you are not judging me. I have lived so firmly away from slapping my child, and I didn't think about it. I slapped him in the blink of an eye. But 17 and a half was great. We've had very, very, very intensive healing and a lot of help as a result of that. And he's like as hilarious and adorable as he was at 10 or 11, but he's a cool guy now. He's grown up, all his facial hair, and kind of lift me and move me around if he wants to. Anyway, so one of the things that happens at this school is that this one community that live together have, it's like having a little school within a university, and they have a poetry teacher come every week, and it's just very casual. It might be a different person every time. And so this old guy came in from town who is a poet, and he read them some of his poetry, and then he asked to see the guy said, and Sam really doesn't like to write, and the guy said, "This is really good, do you like to write?" And Sam said, "Well, I like to write poetry." And the man said, "You should read this book called Bird by Bird." And then Sam went, "I'm Sam! I'm Sam!" And it was just great for me, to be able to have that kind of joy when, of course, people, I get beat up a lot publicly and in salon letters and reviews for writing about my son and my family, and it's a long story, but obviously it was my decision, and obviously I have been very, very, very careful about not writing about his private stuff. I don't write about his body. I don't write about his, girlfriends and love and all the regular old mess of our lives. But it was just such a wonderful story about having been asked so often. And he is studying poetry and firefighting and woodworking, and he's reading all the same spiritual, psychological books that I was reading 20 years ago. He goes, "Hey, Mom," because one of my media escorts said, they told me this great line they'd seen that said, the only excuse for experience is being 16 or 17. And so at 17 and a half, studying with college kids, they just think, that you're going to know more at 16 and 17 than you're ever going to know again. And he goes, "So, Mom, you should read this guy, Scott Peck." Okay, man. Let me read you another story, and then if you have more questions about anything, I'm really glad to answer them. This is another church story. I just feel like reading church stories because I'm in church in Burlington. I'm in church tomorrow, and I'm so happy to be at church, and I feel really safe here. And the air is delicious, and the windows are exquisite, and I love the drapes, and I love being here at Lent. This is the last story of the book. It's called Kookaburra. The 20th anniversary of my getting sober was last week, the day before my favorite annual church event, Faith Fair. This is a party the church throws for the children of the community, part of our ministry of joy. And 20 years is a landmark birthday in recovery. I've always believed that there was a certain age after which I would be all well, and I'd stop feeling as if I'd been abandoned here on earth with no explanation. When I was little, the magic number was 6. The first graders had maturity and secret information, like the Gnostics. The first graders had lunch boxes. Then it was 13, 18, 21, and now 20 years sober. So the last thing I expected was to make a childish scene the weekend of the 2 events. All I could say is, thank God there are no live feeds of our minds streaming online. I've been in charge of Faith Fair for 6 years, an afternoon in early summer when we rent a colossal inflatable jump house, decorate our church courtyard with balloons and streamers and used car lot flags, and offer the families of the town lunch, snow cones, faith. I'm not in the mood for this. I'm sorry. I'll make something better. I'll just tell you what happens there because it's funny. Is that I can tell. I think I can tell it better than I wrote it. But what happens is that I'm this sort of aging hippie Birkenstock type who pretends not to be capitalistic in any way. So I charge all the big stuff, the big ticket items, which are the jump house, the helium tanks, and the balloons and streamers, and the can't remember, huge balloon bouquets and stuff. And then I always just tell the person in charge of the money how much I spent, and I get reimbursed. It's always been this way. The year before, they'd said, "Can we see your receipts?" And I said, I didn't think to keep them all, but I know exactly what I spent. at party rents. I know exactly the jump house is 110 and so on, and it wasn't a big deal. So last year when I turned 20 in my sobriety, I hadn't kept the receipts again, and late at that night of the faith fair, I just wrote a note to all the people, including the guy who's in charge of reimbursing me, and I said, I'm sorry I forgot to keep receipts, but this is really almost exactly what I spent, and I'd love it if you could reimburse me. And a couple of women wrote back and said that shouldn't be any problem. And then another woman wrote back and she said the guy in charge of financing, the man, said we couldn't do it that way. He needed receipts this year. And I had been made aware of the system, hadn't I? And that's a part of me that feels terminally unique, you know. It feels like I don't quite have to play by the same stupid, ticky-tacky, little boxes rules everyone else does. And something bad happened in me. And I got offended in a kind of self-righteous way. And I wrote a letter back. You know, I've always heard, if you have an idea after 10 o'clock at night, it's not a good idea. It's a bad idea. Write your idea down, and then tomorrow morning you can address it. And I wrote this letter about how I must not have what it took to be a Presbyterian, which is to say, to be like uptight, stick prune figures like yourself. I didn't say that. I said clearly I do not have what it takes to be Presbyterians, which are all about committees and receipts, believe me. And I said I spent a week orchestrating this event. I worked on it for 5 hours, and I cleaned up you all. And all I am saying is I don't have receipts. Okay, so can you cut me some slack? And I had a second good idea. And the second good idea was to rat the guy out to my pastor. And the way you do that now is to put her name on the email. So she would see how badly they were treating me. Me, free spirit, me, who pulls together the faith. Oh my God. So what happened was I sent it, and then I just got it, unfortunately. That's the problem with the internet, is I sent it, and I just started to feel nuts. And my parents had horrible money problems. They never had enough. And in the 50s and 60s, the system was usually that the dad gave the wife a certain monthly budget for the food, and everything had to come out of it. And you know, if when the animals got sick, it had to come out of the food budget. And no matter how much the woman stretched and stretched and stretched it, and no matter how many ways she found to use zucchini, you know, or filler, the woman was always just stressed. It was stressful. It was one of the power trips that I was very glad to see go after the women's movement, when women started being responsible for, started to take charge of their own money. But back then, I realized that this had, I sort of realized that this had nothing to do with this guy at church that I just ratted out from the pastor. It had to do with the way that my dad had treated my money, with my mom with money. That if she came into the office and she needed $30 more to get through the end of the month, he would look up from his Ben Franklin glasses like she told him she needed a new car. And he would look at her and say, I don't understand. Like that. That is just how it was done. I can tell you in every house I know that was how it was done, right? Yeah, I don't understand. Give me more. Give me $20. So I called, when all else fails, and you cannot feel a shred of grace, the best thing to do is to get yourself a glass of water. Jesus, I think, is very clear about the necessity to get glasses of water for thirsty. And I think it's on something that is not controversial. That if people are thirsty, get them a drink of water. So I got myself a glass of water, and then I called someone who's always awake all night. She was sound asleep. I woke her up, and I started saying, oh, I've done this horrible thing, and now they're going to see it's such an elitist, awful letter, and I copied it to Veronica, and I have to go to church tomorrow. She then she said something like, just because when you quit drinking, you get the monkey off your back, the circus never really leaves town. And she said, we're all nuts, and we all have bad days, and we all do stuff that we would pay to undo. And then she said, why don't you go get yourself something to eat? You know, and I did, and I wrote back to everyone that night, including Veronica, so that Veronica could see what a really, truly good person I am. And what how richly Christian and accountable. And I said, I am so sorry about that letter. I think I'm exhausted, and I should have waited, and I could get receipts from the jump house and the Hertz rental, the party rental, and this and that. And I'm very sorry. I said, I hope you can forgive me, and I know you already have. Because that's how insidious churchly love is. You can't get them not to love you. It's just like with Jesus. And in the morning there was an email from the man who wasn't going to pay me without receipts, and it said, we are here with only love for you, Manny. Oh, it was so Jesus. We are here with only love. I mean, that's the message of our Sunday school, is soft body, loved and chosen, and you are only loved. You are only loved. You are loved exactly the same by the Spirit when you are being your most awful as you are when you're working in the food pantry. It's the mystery, you know, and if you don't want to deal with the mystery, then, you know, you're in the wrong business. So let me read you a short piece, and then I guess we should go. Sorry, folks. Don't you think it's 7:50? Okay. This is called Ski Patrol. Not too long ago, I was skiing in the mountains where my son Sam and I spend a weekend most winters. Nowadays, he instantly disappears with the hordes of snowboarders. I believe he is somewhat embarrassed to be seen with me. Once, standing next to him and his friend at the bottom of a hill, I fell over for no reason at all. And in fact, the very first time we went skiing together, I skied in a strangely slow, inexorable path for 100 feet or so, straight into a huge net at the bottom of the slope, erected to protect the small ski bear children from being crushed. Then I got tangled up in it, like a big fish. After Sam disappears, I usually take the chairlift to the top of the pony slope for a couple of runs, which anyone can manage, and I triumph. I roar down the slight incline, pretending to be an Olympic skier. And the truth is, I didn't put it here. I hum hymns as I ski in a quiet city. Filled with confidence, I try the easiest intermediate slope, where I mostly fall or slide down on my butt for the first run, and then have a few extended runs of 4 or 5 minutes where I'm actually skiing. By my second run down an intermediate slope, I am on my feet almost the whole time, skiing triumphantly for America. But this time, as the chairlift carried me to the top of the intermediate slope, which I had just skied down, I experienced a moment's confusion, born of hormones, high altitude, and a light snow falling. I suddenly could not remember whether the stop we were approaching was the same one I had just skied down from. The chair slowed and lowered for us to disembark, and my seatmate got off and zipped away like a swallow, while I sat there torn between wanting to get off and thinking that mine was the next stop. The chair jerked forward and resumed its ascent. I looked around for landmarks, but saw only brightly colored skiers in clusters, and I was pretty sure that this was not the right stop, until a second later when I realized I was mistaken. It was the right stop. By then, the chair was 4 or 5 feet off the ground and rising, but I did not let this stop me. feet off the ground for the timeless instant of eternity before I crashed down into the snow. I landed hard, proving the theory of gravity once again. I was somehow still on my skis for a moment until I fell over. I do not imagine anyone had seen anything like this before. Someone hurtling into outer space with such force from such a low starting point. I felt like Icarus near death in the snow, with melting skis instead of wings. I was immediately aware of two things: that I was not badly hurt, and that most people were pretending not to hurt me. Out of kindness or horror or mortification. I am ever my mother's daughter, and so my first impulse was to smile with confidence to the few who were watching, wave like a politician, campaigning from a rarely used horizontal position. I'm okay, I said to two pretty women who came over and offered to pull me up. I continued to wave nonchalantly, as if this sort of silly thing happened to me all the time. I told them that I just needed to catch my breath. They made sympathetic cooing sounds and skied away. I sat up and looked back on my hands and leaned back on my hands in the snow. By the time I finally stood up, my hands were frozen. I was winded, ashamed, confused, and bruised, grateful only that Sam hadn't seen me. He would have died. He would have stabbed himself repeatedly in the head with his ski pole. Just when I thought things couldn't get much worse, nausea struck, wave after wave, like morning sickness, and I thought, I'm going to throw up in the snow. Ladies and gentlemen, for my next trick, I pretended to pinch my nostrils against the cold, but was actually pressing my hand to my mouth to pull backward tide. My head spun and I prayed, help me, Jesus, help me. The way a very old woman at my church named Mary used to pray at her most afraid and delirious, right in the middle of anything, sermons, songs. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand clamped to my mouth, only my poles, and afraid consignments to our faith to support me. All I knew was that help is always on the way, 100% of the time. Rumi said, someone fills the cup in front of us. I know that when I call out, God will be near and hear and help eventually. Of course, it is the eventually that throws me into despair. For instance, even now, I know America will be restored again, eventually. Although it is hard to envision this at the moment, and it could take a century or more for the nation and the world to recover from the George W. Bush years. But they will. God always hears our cries and helps, and it's always a surprise to see what form God will take on earth. In the old joke, a man whose plane crashed in the tundra bitterly tells a bartender that God forsook him, that he waited and prayed in vain for divine intervention and would have died in the snow if it hadn't been for some stupid Eskimos who came by. So maybe a tall, strong man with a medical toboggan would be by soon, or the two pretty women, or Jesus and earmuffs. Instead, a short, plump man pulled up on skis a few minutes later. She was wearing an orange cap and an official jacket from the ski resort. I think I'm going to throw up, I said, so she wouldn't get too close. Well, then let's just stand here a moment, she said. She had acne and chapped cheeks and small brown eyes. I think I might need help, I said, which is something I forced myself to say every few years. You landed so hard. I saw you from up above, emergency situations like this. Why don't you come with me? She stepped out of her skis and stood on my binding so that I could step out of mine. We picked up our skis and I trudged after her through the snow. We walked to a wooden 10-by-10 shack away from the lift and went inside. It held 2 long benches, a folding chair, and shelves laden with first aid equipment, bottles of water, used coffee cups, a walkie-talkie, and it was warm from a kerosene heater. There were 2 shabby windows through which you could see snowy pine trees outside. The woman poured me a Dixie cup of water, but my face was so cold that I couldn't get my lips to work, and I dribbled water down my front. She took the cup away. "Let's take off your gloves first," she said, and pulled them off, as gently as if they were mittens connected inside my jacket sleeves with a string. She laid my gloves on the chair near the heater and pulled off her own. "Mine are nice and toasty," she said. "You can wear them for a while until yours warm up. I'll be back soon. There are only a couple of us working this spot today." She went outside. After a while, I stretched out on one of the benches and closed my eyes. The kerosene smelled like lacquer, and I kept feeling waves of nausea. My bones were cold. I could isolate the icy scent of pine trees that sneaked through the walls. Sometimes grace is a ribbon of mountain air that gets in through the cracks. I practiced concentrating between each wave of nausea the way I did when I was in labor, savoring ice chips and apple juice between contractions. Miles from home, holed up deeply alone in a smelly hut, I had the old familiar feelings of separation from myself, from God, and from the happy, pretty people outside. I thought of the woman from the ski patrol with her small brown eyes. She looked like the monk seals that swim ashore in Hawaii to rest on the sand. The adult seals are 6 and 7 feet long, and they all look like Charles Lawton. The newest tourists on the beach think they are dying and need to be rescued, but anyone who has been there even a day knows that they come on shore to rest. Pool workers from the beachside resorts always arrive with yellow safety tape and traffic cones to rope off the space for the seals to rest in. The first time I came upon one in the sand, I thought it was trying to make eye contact with me. I thought I was its last best hope of being saved. It had sand around its eyes and lots of sharp scars. My guy Rory, who surfs in Hawaii every year, laughed and explained that the seals are perfectly fine, and when they are rested, they waddle back to the ocean. This is how I feel about the world much of the time, when I'm not feeling too far gone. Things are how they are supposed to be, all evidence to the contrary. Life swims, lumbers across the sand, rests, lumbers, swims, rests. I lay there on the beach immobilized. If I were a monk seal, I could have waddled up into a sitting position, slid off the bench, and pulled myself by my flippers back into the ocean. Rory once saw Mother's monk seal teaching her pup how to rest by swimming up onto the sand for a while before slipping back into the waves. The 2 of them practiced over and over, then disappeared into the water. Remembering this made me miss Sam terribly. I felt discarded, and I needed for time to pass more quickly. I would be fine with life's contractions if they would simply pass when I am ready for them to, so I could be okay again and remember, after all, what one is doing in labor. Being human can be so dispiriting, though. It's a real stretch for me a lot of the time. I put my nose to a crack in the wall so I could smell the pine. I couldn't wait any longer for the ski patrol woman to come back. Where was she? She'd said. She was my only real friend. And I was such a mess. Oh, to that today you would hearken to his voice, the psalmist wrote, and harden not your hearts. Okay, fine, I said to God, and then noticed that I was much less of a frozen mess than I'd been earlier. This was a lot. I could have sat up, but I wanted the ski patrol person to see the full extent of my suffering. If she ever, in fact, returned. I thought of the people I know from church and political circles who are doing a kind of psychic ski patrol in the world, noticing when people are in trouble, refusing to look away, offering an ear and their own warm gloves to wear. 20 minutes later, my ski patrol woman did come back, rubbing her bare hands together. "How are you doing?" she asked. At first, the enthusiasm in her voice worried me because she sounded as if we might now move on to calisthenics. Then I could tell that she knew I was fine, better, rested. I was peaceful. She was my own private pool worker, my own mother seal. I sat up and breathed in the fresh air from the open door. She gave me another Dixie cup of water, and I hoisted it dramatically. She walked over to the heater and checked my gloves. "They're all ready to wear again if you'll give me mine back." I stood up. I felt like my old self again, which is to say creaky but okay. "I'd take the chair down," she said, "unless you really, really want to ski." I really wanted to ski. I'd already had one great run down this slope. She made a huge fuss over me when I left, as if I'd been in an avalanche. I pulled on my gloves and headed out onto the huge white ocean of ice. I glided and fell and got back up and skied little by little, the very best I could, all the way back down